There's a moment you've probably lived more times than you care to admit. Someone questions your idea, your chest tightens, your breath shortens. Before they even finish speaking, you're already building your reply, arming your tone, gathering your proof, sharpening your voice. You're not listening to understand, you're listening to win. This isn't strategy, it's instinct. And it runs deeper than logic. Because somewhere inside, the mind confuses being right with being safe. We learn it early that correctness earns applause, that answers gain respect, that if you want to matter, you'd better make sure you're never wrong. And so we cling to certainty like it's oxygen. But what if the opposite is true? What if needing to be right is the very thing that's keeping you small? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who spent his life exploring the unseen architecture of the psyche, warned of the trap. Through pride, we are ever deceiving ourselves. But deep down, a still, small voice says to us, something is out of tune. That voice isn't weakness, it's the self. The self isn't interested in winning arguments. It's interested in wholeness. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply wants alignment. But the ego is louder. It tells us to interrupt, to dominate, to stack our logic like weapons, not to understand, but to control, not to connect, but to be crowned. Because under the ego's volume is a deeper fear. If I'm wrong, I disappear. But that fear is a lie. You don't vanish when you're wrong. You grow, you open, you let go of the mask that says your value lives in being correct. And you begin to ask a better question. Not who's right, but what's right. The difference isn't small, it's everything. Because one is about validation, and the other is about truth. So ask yourself, when you speak, is it to be heard or to actually hear? When you argue, is it for clarity or control? When you push back, is it for principle or pride? The ego wants to be seen, but the self wants to see. And if you let go of the need to be right, you might finally start to understand. You made your case, you won the debate, they backed down. But the silence that follows doesn't feel like triumph, it feels like distance. You walk away with the last word and a strange weight in your chest. Because somewhere in that quiet, a deeper truth begins to whisper, that didn't feel like winning. It's a feeling many avoid, the hollow aftertaste of being right at the expense of being whole. We think correctness brings clarity, that proof brings peace, that winning settles everything. But more often, it severs connection. Carl Jung called this a turning point, not a failure, but an invitation. A moment when the ego begins to crack and the self starts to rise. It's when you begin to sense the cost of performance. The cost of always needing to be heard, admired, obeyed. The cost of being right all the time. And here's the paradox. The more you need to be right, the less you're able to receive what's true, because the ego doesn't serve truth, it serves identity. It uses facts like armor and logic like a wall. Not to build trust, but to protect its image. It's not about the idea. It's about you being the one who had it. And that is when rightness becomes a performance, not a principle. There's an old story about King Solomon. Two women came to him, each claiming to be the mother of the same child. Solomon didn't argue. He offered to divide the child in two. One woman agreed. The other begged him to stop and offered to give up her claim so the child could live. Solomon handed her the child. Because only love is willing to lose to protect what matters. That's wisdom. That's what happens when you stop asking who deserves the credit and start asking what protects the truth. This is what the ego doesn't understand. That being right means nothing if you destroy what's sacred along the way. And here's the part most people never admit. There are moments where choosing what's right will make you look like you've lost. You'll stay silent when you could shine. You'll take responsibility when you could deflect. You'll let others take the spotlight, the praise, the credit, because that's where the integrity lives, and it will sting. because your ego will scream, "What about me?" But something deeper will whisper back, "This is who you are now." The ego chases applause, the self builds legacy. And the first sign you're evolving is that being right stops feeling so important. Because you're not building an image anymore, you're becoming someone real. You're not afraid of being wrong. You're afraid of what being wrong might reveal. That maybe you're not as in control as you appear. That your authority could be questioned. That if someone else is right, you might disappear beneath the silence. But that fear, it doesn't start in the moment. It starts in the shadow. Carl Jung called the shadow the unconscious part of the personality we deny, suppress, or forget. It's everything we don't want to see in ourselves, but shows up when we least expect it. It's the smirk you hide when someone else fails. The coldness you feel when they get the credit. The sharpness in your tone, not because they were wrong, but because they didn't need you to be right. The shadow doesn't shout, it whispers. Don't let them win. Don't let them speak first. Don't let them outshine you. And the less you recognize it, the more it controls you. That's the danger. What stays unconscious doesn't vanish, it governs. We call someone arrogant, but really we're intimidated by their clarity. We call someone weak, but maybe they're just unwilling to play power games. We frame our reactions as logic, strategy, leadership, but they're often just old wounds disguised as values. This is projection. And projection is the shadow's favorite camouflage. It doesn't want to be seen. It wants to be validated from the outside in. But the more we chase that validation, the further we drift from truth. There's an old Cherokee story. A grandfather tells his grandson that two wolves live inside us. One is ego, pride, envy, control. The other is principle, truth, humility, compassion. The two are always fighting. The boy asks which one wins. The grandfather replies, "The one you feed." That story has stayed alive for a reason. Because it's not just about good and bad. It's about which inner voice we serve when it matters most. And high performers, the ones who lead, build, command, are often those most at risk. Because when you've built your life on competence, confidence, and precision, the idea that something beneath you might be steering the wheel, that's terrifying. But here's the paradox. The more control you need, the less peace you'll have. Because control isn't clarity, and dominance isn't truth. You can lead from fear, or you can lead from depth, but not both. The cost of ignoring the shadow is steep. Team trust erodes, feedback disappears, truth gets filtered through your ego's hunger to be right. And slowly your influence shrinks into performance. But the moment you turn toward the shadow, not to kill it, but to know it, everything changes. You realize your sharpest reactions aren't about now, they're about then. You stop arguing to be seen and start listening to what's actually being said. Because you can't grow into someone principled until you face the part of you that's not. The ego wants to be clean. The self wants to be whole. And the leader who has met their own shadow becomes the one others trust to hold the light. Not every act of strength looks like power. Sometimes it looks like silence. Like letting go, like choosing not to take the credit even when you could. That's not submission, that's sovereignty. Carl Jung described this shift as the emergence of the self, the part of you that doesn't perform for approval but lives in alignment. The part that listens more than it speaks, that holds principle over pride. That doesn't need recognition to do the right thing. But that choice, it costs. Sometimes it costs your ego everything it's built its identity around, being admired, being irreplaceable, being the one who saves the day. And that's why most people never make it. They confuse power with presence. Control with leadership. They keep building louder, faster, more visible lives, while the part of them that longs for stillness, depth, and dignity slowly fades. But the ones who do choose differently, they change everything. Take Gandalf, offered the One Ring, ultimate power, perfect control. He refused, not because he feared failure, but because he knew what power does when it seduces even the well-intentioned. He knew that to lead from truth meant saying no to glory. Or Nelson Mandela, 27 years imprisoned for fighting injustice. And when he was finally freed, he didn't seek revenge. He put on the jersey of the white rugby team that once symbolized everything that oppressed him and wore it publicly. He didn't erase the past, he transformed it. Because his leadership wasn't about being right, it was about choosing what was right. That's the courage we're talking about here, not the loud kind that takes the stage. The quiet kind that steps back, lifts others up, lets the truth breathe, even when it doesn't benefit you. And this isn't abstract, you've faced this before. When someone took your idea and got the credit and you said nothing. When you knew the truth but stayed silent so a team could stay intact. When you lost the argument on purpose, not out of weakness. But because the principle was more important than the win. The ego hated it, but your soul it exhaled. That's when you knew something had shifted. You weren't trying to win anymore. You were trying to live aligned, and here's the secret the world doesn't tell you. The legacy that lasts isn't built by those who demanded attention. It's built by those who stood for something, even when no one clapped. So ask yourself, in your hardest moments, when truth costs you the most, who do you want making the decision? Your ego? Or yourself? One wants credit, the other builds character. And only one of them leaves something worth remembering. The mistake is thinking the ego must be destroyed. That's not the goal. The ego isn't the enemy. It's just an apprentice who thinks it's the master. It helped you build. It helped you push, helped you get here. But if it stays in charge, it'll burn down everything it helped create. Because the ego only knows how to chase, it doesn't know how to listen. Carl Jung understood this. He said the task is not to get rid of the ego, but to integrate it, to place it in service to something higher than itself. That something is the self, not the mask, not the brand, not the curated identity you present to the world, but the deeper intelligence within you, the one that doesn't need to be admired to know it's valuable. The one that knows that truth doesn't need an audience, it just needs a home. Integration is what happens when you stop fighting yourself. When the ego stops resisting what the self already knows, it's not a moment of glory. It's a moment of surrender, and in that surrender, everything reorganizes. You no longer speak just to be heard, you speak to serve. You no longer react to be validated, you respond to stay aligned. You no longer need to prove you're right, you're anchored in something more stable than perception. It's a quiet shift, but it changes everything. Your presence stops demanding attention, it starts creating safety. Your leadership stops being about visibility, it starts being about vision. Because when your ego is integrated, you don't stop leading, you lead from a deeper place. And not from your image, but from your integrity. That's when people start listening differently. They lean in, not because you speak louder, but because your words come from somewhere real. You've been on both sides, you've led from the desire to impress. And you've led from the place that doesn't need to be impressive. You know the difference. One is heavy, the other is free. Integration doesn't mean perfection. It means you're no longer ruled by your wound. You're ruled by your wisdom, and that wisdom doesn't make noise. It leaves impact. This is when leadership becomes legacy. Not when you're the hero, but when you become the judge, the quiet, fair, principle-driven guide who doesn't need to be right, to do what's right. People don't follow perfection, they follow congruence. And congruence only happens when the ego stops pretending to be the self. That's the hidden transformation, the one nobody sees, but everybody feels. You won't trend for it. No one will throw you a parade for choosing what's right over what makes you look good. You won't get an award for holding your tongue when you could have humiliated someone. No algorithm rewards restraint. No metric measures moral courage. But if you've ever felt the pain of being unseen and still chosen the higher road anyway, then you've already started building something most people never will. A quiet legacy, not built on volume, not built on virality, but built on truth. Carl Jung believed the second half of life was not about adding more, but letting go. Not about constructing an image, but becoming whole. Not about being known, but being real. This is where the work turns sacred, because now you're not acting for applause, you're acting from principle. You're not reacting to prove, you're choosing to protect what matters. And the cost of that is real. You'll be overlooked, you'll be misunderstood. You'll watch louder voices get credit for quieter truths you held all along, and still you'll keep going. Because you've seen what ego does when it's in control. You've seen it fracture teams, distort truth, turn vision into vanity. And you've also seen what happens when someone holds the line calmly, steadily, even invisibly. Those are the leaders people never forget. Not because they demanded attention, but because they made everyone around them feel more like themselves. This is how the world changes. Not through charisma, through character. And your legacy won't be found in the speeches you gave or the platforms you built. It'll be in the quiet decisions you made when no one was watching. It'll be in the way you chose dignity over dominance, clarity over control. What's right over who's right. So if this message found you, maybe it's because some part of you was ready. Not to rise in the usual way, but to deepen, not to conquer the room, but to bring light to it. And maybe the next time you feel the urge to correct, to dominate, to prove, something else will rise in you instead. Stillness, integrity, truth. The part of you that doesn't need credit to be whole. That's the voice that doesn't just speak, it echoes. And that echo is legacy.